Hi, I'm Anthony Originello, CEO of the Chartered Professionals in Human Resources for BC and Yukon. We represent more than 8,000 members, and as the organization dedicated to advancing the HR profession through education, advocacy, awareness, professional development, as well as our recognized and impactful CPHR designation, we are proud to be a sponsor of this show. We have been the voice of the HR profession since 1942. Learn more about us at cphrbc.ca.
In this edition of Careers That Matter, I'm joined by Kenton Boston of the Canadian Men's Health Foundation. Kenton, welcome.
Thank you.
You're the president there, aren't you?
President and CEO.
Oh, and CEO.
Yes.
What's the difference?
Two hats, same head, I think.
Yeah. But as such, how complex is your job? What are your responsibilities?
It's very complex and yet simple at the same time. We're an organization that was created 11 years ago to help men live longer, healthier lives. Simple. How you do that becomes very complex, and that gets you into the healthcare system, that gets you into creating content, marketing, social media, and then using all of that to create programs to get in the hands of people across the country to help them live longer and healthier.
Is your job to determine the focus and direction of the organization? Or is it to run it?
It's a bit of both. I come from a perspective of media, which brings all sorts of content understandings from across the country, television, radio, digital, marketing. So I bring that skill set to the table. So it is about leadership in the sense of what does success look like. How we do that, that's kind of up to the team. We're an organization that is funded from various governments primarily, and we're always also looking for private individuals to believe that our role in life is to make a difference. And so that's another part of what I do, is that natural fundraising and ability to, I would say, become an advocate for organizations, people, and roll that into wherever I'm talking, be it government, be it this conversation, and make it real that men are in a problem state right now, and how do we come together to make a difference?
Well, you just reeled off about 4 or 5 different responsibilities that you have. Fundraising, advocacy, media relations, interpersonal community building, but you also have to manage a team.
Yeah.
And how big is your team?
It's about 10 people. So it's a very tight team. We're going through making sure, just finishing off joining forces with other organizations, one called Blueprint, which is a group of researchers tied to UBC, and making sure that as we go forward, we were an organization that was more on the communications, PR side, marketing side, and now we have a group of researchers that we are relying on to take the research and help them get the research into the hands of people. So that's kind of, as I break it down, the nutshell of what I do. But you oversee all of those other tenants, but it's about bringing people up and elevating people so that they can take ownerships in each of those areas that you went through.
And you're national.
National.
So that adds other complications.
It does. You get to appreciate the clock a little bit. There's nothing wrong with a 7 o'clock call or a 6 o'clock call AM in BC to hit the center of the universe, otherwise known as Toronto.
Never heard of it.
So that's part of it. And the other part of the real challenge, though, is to make sure that you're reflecting people in all those areas in the country. Take the different areas of BC or Ontario or Alberta, and take the different population bases based on rural or different parts of the city, and then within the city, the different communications for different levels and different people, and then roll in people that English is not their first language. Mm-hmm. And then it's not just communication, it becomes a challenge of kind of reflecting the nature of how they would expect that information that we're sharing to land in Farsi or land in whatever language that they would maybe speak first. So those are the challenges.
You talked about the clock, the 6 or 7 a.m. call. How many days a week and how many hours a day do you devote to this two-hatted job that you have?
Who's watching right now? Of course, it's 8 hours only with a half-hour break. The days are long, I'm not going to lie. They can often be 10 hours or longer. 12 is easy to put in. We're in a period of time where it's taking a lot. The team is very busy because we do have this merger that we're working through. We're building the organization. We're looking for partners, looking for funding, and it's starting to come together that will get us into a space where we'll have more money to add some more bodies on to take the heat off the rest of us. So it's very busy right now, and I've told people, let's get through to the end of the year. Let's get into next year. Let's get into a rhythm, because it's not sustainable. And people will say to me, Kenton, you're the Canadian Men's Health Foundation. You were, emailing at 5:30 in the morning. It's 6 p.m. and you're still going. That's not you as a leader showing everyone else how it should be. And so that's my challenge to take on, to roll that back a little bit.
Well, it sounds pretty normal to me. I think
It's
I was sending
indicative,
out an
isn't it?
email at 3:30 in the morning this morning. It's just like, I'm awake, there it is. The thoughts are in my mind, and away you go.
It's true.
So where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Ontario, in a farm northeast of Toronto.
And you graduate high school, did you go, I know what I want to do when I'm in my 50s. I want to lead a National Men's Health Foundation.
If only. I wanted to work in radio. I grew up on a farm. We had one TV station, sometimes two. It was CBC, sometimes CTV. That was it. We didn't have global at the time. It came later on. And
So
it was
would
always,
you listen to Morningside with Peter Zosky?
sometimes I did.
Oh, I love that.
Sometimes I did.
Like, he was good.
He was very good. I didn't know until I was older, though, that CBC even existed, because we didn't get it right where we were.
Oh.
So that was kind of an add-on that I had as I grew up. I tell you what I did. What got me into media was going to bed, turning the radio on, and having Chicago roll in, and I could hear things from Chicago or New Orleans. As you know, at nighttime the signals can go further. And that really whet my appetite. And then I started watching news. Knowlton Nash would be
The
one
National,
of them.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he in the 80s really sticks out. I'm sure there were others. Lloyd Robertson, when I was over with my grandparents.
Because they had CTV.
They had CTV.
Right.
And that was where I started. And so I left, I went to school in Fenelon Falls, Ontario, and left at 18 to go to school in Toronto. And that put me down.
You went to
the
Ryerson?
path. I went to Seneca College.
Oh. And studied?
And studied for 2 years.
Broadcast journalism?
Broadcast journalism. I had a job at the end of my first year. I worked for CKO Radio. Do you remember CKO Radio? It was the first network in Canada outside of the CBC, and it was private.
Yeah.
And I worked with a bunch of characters, including Harvey Kirk at one point, was reading the news there.
So were you a reporter?
I started ripping wire for free is how I started, and that put me down a technical. I used to play radio commercials for the Blue Jays. Telemedia was a company that owned the Blue Jays, and I ran commercials that ran in London, Ontario, Sydney, and Toronto, and that was my first job.
Wow.
Doing that, then I ran Master Control. I got into the journalism side, working. They had a wire service. I started working on the wire service. That was where Tiananmen Square. I watched Tiananmen Square unfold, working on this wire service as all the images were coming in from that period of time. And that really put me down a course of, I often say to people, there's nothing that has happened since early 1990s, maybe the late 1988, 89, that I haven't been involved with and covering in some capacity up until I joined the Men's Health Foundation in 24.
So you start in radio, but you switched over to television at some point.
Yeah.
What happened?
Radio was dying in the 90s. It's still around. I was laid off twice. And after the second layoff, I was in Toronto. 2 kids, married. I believe I was making, if I remember, about $21,000 a year as the main breadwinner in the relationship. And that was a start from 12,000, which is where I started at. So I was really happy with that. But the second layoff, I said, this is garbage. And I had a friend that had a renovation company. I started doing construction. And I went up to $30,000 a year overnight. And I was just like, why would I go back to radio? But I had friends that had moved on to CTV and CBC and radio, 680 in Toronto, still there, news channel. And they kept pestering me, and you've got to come out, you're talented, you can't let it go. And I kept saying, I'm making more money there. And finally, I landed at CTV as a freelance writer working with Canada AM. and I was a news writer with Canada AM. And I started doing overnight shifts, and I became the continuity writer for Keith Morrison and Valerie Pringle, if those names ring a bell. And that moved up to Dan Matheson and Lisa LaFlamme. And so I stayed with CTV until I moved over to Global in 2005. And while I was at CTV, I became the lead executive producer, working with Lloyd Robertson and working with him on specials and news specials. So I'd worked my way up from a freelance writer up to driving some valuable properties inside the CTV world.
And at Global, what was your role?
At Global, Kevin Newman had reached out to me when he was in New York and he was moving to Vancouver to go to Global and wondered if I'd be interested. And I was in Toronto, and I'm like, why would I move to Vancouver? So the answer was no. 3 years later, they came back to say, okay, we have a position at Global Toronto. Will you leave CTV to come over to Global Toronto? I did. Within 6 weeks later, they said, congratulations, your job is now in Vancouver. And I would travel back and forth. And I said, well, I understand I'm working in Toronto through Vancouver. And they said, no, you don't understand. Your job is in Vancouver now. So I had 2 young kids. I divorced in Toronto, so I figured a way. The first year I moved to Vancouver, worked in Vancouver, lived in Toronto.
Wow.
And after the year, was advised, your costing is too much, Kenton. You got to physically move to Vancouver. And that's how I ended up in Vancouver as the senior executive producer for Global National. And a fun story, when I left CTV, they were upset that I was leaving them. And I remember speaking with my boss at the time, and he called me into his office, and it was just off the newsroom, and he threw down some of the latest ratings, and he said, this is the company you're going to, Kenton. CTV and Lloyd Robertson was the most watched national newscast in Canada, even better than the CBC at that time. And I picked up his document that contained the ratings, and I threw it back at his desk and said, within 2 years, we, Global National, will be the most watched newscast in Canada. And it was within about a year and a half that we accomplished the most watched national newscast in Canada with Kevin Newman as the anchor, produced out of Vancouver.
So what changed? How come you wound up leaving that business?
Enormous change, as you know, in the media world. So I wasn't, as life went on, I became, vice president, and you get away from the core of the reason you were doing that, storytelling, and you would, your story became, here's how we can spin these layoffs or these investments in technology, or this is what we have to do. So I was losing that kind of connection, but you carry on. You believe, and I did believe always in what we were doing. Had various positions across, ran Western Canada at one point, back into national news, always splitting my time between Vancouver and Toronto. And just the month before COVID, I was due for a physical, and I kept putting that off, because I'm healthy. Why would I need to go? Eat right, try to work out, all those things. And I was losing my ability to move my left arm. And I thought maybe I'd try to do weights and lift, move the muscle or something. Didn't worry about that. And I went in for my physical in Vancouver, had my physical, hopped on a plane back to Toronto. Next morning, get a phone call. And the phone call was, you need to talk to the doctor and be in a room that's by yourself. I was in the offices in Toronto, very public space, booked one of the boardrooms that had glass all around as I sat in the boardroom for the doctor to tell me, you've got a mass growing around your left kidney and you need to see your doctor as soon as you can. So I did that, booked the appointment with my doctor, and what happened then? COVID struck and the world shut down. So my doctor had heard that I had a mass around my left kidney. He was trying to work in the early days to get me in hospital in Vancouver for treatment, and we need the CD, Kenton. The company that I used, the private company that I used for my scan, had closed down. He found a doctor that was willing to treat me early days of COVID, and I couldn't get anything to him to show what I was that I had inside of me. Found somebody, called, trying to be calm, early days. Remember how angst in everyone was. Found somebody that answered the phone because they were in cleaning the office because of the COVID time and all those cleans. They answered the phone and I said, please don't hang up on me. I really need your help. And this person went back and found a technician and they said, Kenton, we have your CD. And I said, okay. And it was this whole cloak and dagger, early days. Okay, we'll leave it outside on the street as I come up out of my car because we can't talk to each other, grab the CD, get back in my car, go to my doctor's office over on Burrard Street, same kind of thing, reverse. Okay, I'm coming in. Can I get in the elevator? Well, we'll just hit the button, so don't touch the buttons. Go to this floor, drop it off there. Text us when you drop it off, then we'll come and grab your CD. So that was my introduction into the healthcare system and into cancer and into COVID. That's how I started it. Long story short, they determined that nobody gets cancer. I had it, so it's not cancer, so carry on. But I continued to have physical problems, and what was happening was my ribs were starting to be pushed out, and I was having problems moving and left arm. Early days of COVID, running the national news division, you can imagine how that worked. There was Me Too and Black Lives Matter, if you remember that whole period in time. And I was on kind of one of the more leading edge positions with the network about how are we covering this and who's doing what. So I soldiered on and carried on, didn't say anything to anybody through this process. Told my partner about it, that was it. So finally talked to my chiropractor, who said, Kenton, you really should get that taken care of. We can't fix you up. So I booked into June, so it's March into June. They said, we can take it out arthroscopically. And I said, awesome. I'm going to book a motorcycle trip so I don't have to say anything to anybody. To my Men's Health Foundation, I was living the way of saying nothing to anybody. So I didn't say anything, and I went in it was supposed to be in and out, in one day, out the next day. I said, great, I'll be on the motorcycle later that next day, 4 or 5 days for my mental health journey, which is what motorcycling is to me. And I'll be fine. No one will know the difference. It's not cancer. Who cares? I remember waking up about day number 3, or it might have been day number 4, and kind of coming through, and the surgeon was standing at my foot. And I looked down, and I had an incision in my lower abdomen, and I said, what is happening? Why do I have this? And she held her hand up, and she said, Kenton, I had to get this inside of you because that's the only way I could get the mass out. You had an enormous mass around your left kidney, and that's how we couldn't do it arthroscopically. Oh, and you're bleeding still. Oh, and there's something else left inside of you. And I said, you don't understand. I'm supposed to be on a motorcycle trip. And they're like, yeah, you're not going to be on a motorcycle trip. Long story short, they didn't have to go back in. I went home, didn't say anything, was working on a restructure at the company, came to work on Monday, couldn't sit up, laying on the couch, but it was COVID, so no one needed to see you. It was just phone call or just video off on your Teams call. Carried on working, and that carried on because it wasn't cancer, until I got the phone call from my doctor at 1 o'clock later that week. And the doctor said, Kenton, this is hard to say to you, but my sister had passed away from cancer a few years ago in Toronto. And the doctor said, Kenton, listen closely. You have a rare form of cancer. It was cancer. We didn't think it would be, but it is cancer. You need to get on an airplane tonight and go to your sister's hospital and stay in emergency and do not leave that hospital until they treat your cancer. We don't feel that there are people in Vancouver that have the skill set to manage or treat you. Do this tonight. Bye. So you can imagine that impact. And I hadn't told anybody about any of this conversation. So we'd had a conversation about what to do. Took a couple of days, talked to my family. Remember, my sister's doctor in Toronto reached out to her. It was a rare sarcoma that I had. If you went to New York, I think it was Houston and Milan, Italy, you knew the disease. If you didn't go there, you did not know how to deal with this disease. My sister lasted about 2 years, and sadly she passed away before she was 50. I had turned 52, if I recall, 53. So found out through a lot of phone calls that my doctor here in Vancouver, my eventual doctor, was a student of my sister's doctor in Toronto. So she was tied to New York and Milan, and my Dr. McNeil here in Vancouver was fantastic. She also went to Milan, Italy, stayed in Vancouver, booked the surgery in November. And in November, they went in and cut everything out. I do not have cancer, which is awesome. I left the surgery dragging my left leg because they had to cut out a bunch of things inside of me to make sure I don't have cancer. So the journey has been about how to learn how to do things, walk and run and all these basic things again. And it took me about 1.5 years, and I came back into work after 1.5 years, and life had changed.
Your job.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
And I came back, and it was a different world. I came back actually right as Russia invaded Ukraine. And so I came back to, Kenton, what's the plan? So I went through that journey, come back to who are we moving in to cover the war over there, and where are crews going, in that part of conversation. I remember sitting there trying to process, because you can imagine after being in the healthcare space and fighting for your life and all that, to be back, and now you're leading teams and being part of a team. And I remember my head pounding with pain because of the brain that I hadn't used, and now was automatically in. And I stayed there for a few months, and then kind of came to terms and said, it's time for me to leave.
So the world changed and you changed.
Yes, it did. And I came back, and it was a different world than what I was a year and a half previous.
And then what led to your current position? How'd that come about?
So I didn't know what I was going to do. I took a truck driving license. I've always felt it's not about the position, it's about what I want to do. And I always wanted to drive a truck. Grew up on a farm. There you go. So I was going to get my full truck driving license. And then I was like, wait, a class 1 is $17,000. So I got everything else up to the class 1. And then I thought, okay, if I can't do anything else, and I was still, my body was still healing. I was still learning my new body, because it was a new body. Things were cut out, and had to learn how to eat and what to eat. And it's a journey that continues today. And so I thought, well, at least I can sit in a truck and my brain's working. I can drive a truck. So I did one job working with the movie set in Vancouver, was my one truck driving job. Then I saw this position for CEO of the Canadian Men's Health Foundation. And I thought, what are the chances of me? I don't know healthcare. I'd done some great work with Variety, been chair of the board of Variety, the children's charity in BC, doing some great work and fundraising, and working with them in the global space, where we had the telethon on global television for a lot of years. Worked with a charity over in Alberta a few times as well, and was part of the board there. So this opportunity came along, and I read through, and it ticked a lot about my world, about marketing, about messaging and media, and how do we reach people, except I don't know anything about healthcare. So I applied. Yeah, kind of forgot about it. And then I got a call, and it was about, are you interested in this position? Sure. And it was just to lead number of conversations. And next I ended up with Dr. Larry Goldenberg, chair of the organization, one of the leaders in health space in Vancouver.
Especially in men's health.
Especially in men's health, a urologist.
Yep.
And we got along. And it was really interesting. As I would say things, he would say, that's what I would say. And that was my perspective. So it was kind of an alignment of thoughts. And I brought a skill set that he was looking for. And obviously he's one of the, he's just fantastic to work with, and what he brings to the table. So it was about our skill set and how do we bring them together to take the organization into a national footprint across the country. And that's how it started. And after a series of interviews, I joined the organization as the president and CEO.
Well, congratulations on that. When you take a look at your career, what do you think has been essential, or an element of your success, something that you have discovered about yourself that goes, yeah, this is what has propelled me forward and allowed me to grow and be successful?
It's having the fine line of being driven, but being driven with the perspective of those around you and their best interests. So having strategic vision, direction, but handing it over to your team and elevating the strengths of others, to the point where, and it has happened, where they become, more senior to you. And that's fine. And I've kind of lived in that space, as much as I might get a little rankled over here, hey, I'm the boss. But I've really tried to never be that person, and I still try today. And obviously sometimes there needs to be a boss, you will know. There just needs to be one point to do the planning and the strat vision and make the determination. But it's really about elevating people. And some of my best moments are when people come back to say, had hard conversations and they've listened and changed their life, and they've come back to say thank you, because no one's ever said that to me before, or had the tough conversations. I've always tried to relate to the business and drive everything through a business perspective. It's not personal. even if it was about personalities, but it was about what is needed for the business going forward. And that continues today. We've got a small team with the Canadian Men's Health Foundation, but it's about making sure we have the right people in the right roles, that I have created the right roles based on the vision with input from the team, and then you find the right person. And we're building that up, and we've got a great, tight team to really drive this conversation forward.
Thank you. Thanks for giving us an insight into your job and your career path.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.